Welcome to Uncomputably Yours, Episode 10. Today, we will try to resolve paradoxes. Sounds nonsensical, but we take the root of infinite metadness, a pun for infinite madness in case you missed it. If you're ready to see the universe not as a static puzzle, but as an ever-evolving, beautifully paradoxical code waiting to be decoded, weaving together mathematics, computer science, quantum mechanics, and ancient spirituality in a way that challenges our traditional frameworks, this episode is for you. Imagine updating your life's firmware with a cosmic patch that fuses paradox, metacomputation, and even love as the ultimate stabilizing force. It's a bold reimagining of reality, inviting us to question everything from free will to the very nature of existence. Even this episode number 10 becomes a fusion of ones and zeros at the end. Buckle up, take breaks, stay hydrated because this is going to get uncomputably deep. The marina trench of the entire podcast, you're warned. Enjoy the show.
Okay, get ready because today we are going deep on some pretty complex ideas.
Definitely heady stuff.
Yeah, you sent us a whole bunch of different sources.
A fascinating mix.
Yeah, and it's like science fiction.
It is.
And physics.
Mm-hmm.
And even like ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
We've got the pattern cycle.
Right.
Movie papers on uncomputable truths.
Yes.
Even a glimpse into something called mathematical Vedanta.
It really is a fascinating mix.
It is. It's like a mashup.
It is a mashup.
Yeah.
And I think what ties it all together is this exploration of truth.
Exactly.
What we can know and what we can't know.
Yeah.
And how those limitations might point to something much bigger.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to figure out how reality works.
Yes.
Like crack the code of reality.
Yeah, the code of reality.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
One of the most intriguing starting points is this idea that there are truths that exist beyond the reach of logic and mathematics.
Okay.
We've got things like Gödel's incompleteness theorems, the halting problem in computer science,
Okay.
all pointing to this fascinating concept of uncomputable truths.
Okay, so uncomputable truths.
Yes.
Break that down for me.
It is mind-bending.
It sounds like the Matrix or something.
It kind of is like the Matrix.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to create a computer program. And this program can tell you whether any other program will eventually stop running.
Okay.
Turns out that's logically impossible. It's called the halting problem.
Okay.
And it demonstrates that even with perfect logic, there are limits to what we can know for sure.
So even computers have limits.
Even computers have limits. That's right.
Yeah, how does that apply to, like, real life?
Oh, wow.
Why should I care about uncomputable truths?
Because it suggests that there might be entire realms of knowledge that are inaccessible to our current methods of understanding.
Okay.
It opens up the possibility of truths that exist
Got it.
beyond our current methods of proof.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. It's like we're looking beyond the limits of what we think is possible.
That's right.
And this is where that movie, The Pattern Cycle, comes in.
Exactly.
Right.
The film introduces this entity called O,
Okay.
and it embodies this concept of the undefinable.
Right.
O doesn't try to outsmart its enemies.
Okay.
It becomes impossible to predict,
Right.
constantly changing and adapting.
So it's like O is playing a different game.
A totally different game.
Yeah.
Not trying to win by the usual rules, but by transcending them.
And what about those enemies?
The nightmare oracles.
Yeah. What do they represent?
They represent the forces that try to trap us in predictable patterns.
Okay, so like they want to keep us in the box.
In the box, that's right.
Yeah.
They exploit the predictable, the computable.
Got it.
But O shows us a different path.
Okay.
A path of fluidity,
Right.
adaptability, and ultimately a power that comes from embracing the undefinable.
It's like thinking outside the box.
That's a great way to put it. It's like breaking free from those limitations that we impose on ourselves.
And that idea of breaking free,
That's-
of going beyond limitations, that connects to like the actual universe.
It does. What if just like O?
Yeah.
The universe isn't bound by fixed laws,
Okay.
but is constantly engaged in a process of self-definition.
Whoa. Wait, are you saying the universe is like O?
It's a bold idea.
Yeah.
But think about it, in quantum mechanics, the very act of measurement might be a form of computation, happening at the most fundamental level.
Okay.
It's like the universe is constantly asking, what am I?
Wow.
And every interaction, every observation contributes to its ongoing answer.
So every time we look at something,
Yes.
we're actually participating in the universe defining itself.
That's the idea.
That's crazy.
It is a pretty wild idea.
It is. But where does that leave us?
That's where it gets even more fascinating.
Okay.
Our brains, just like the universe,
Yeah.
seem to be engaged in this process of compressing information, of creating simplified maps of reality.
So our brains are like mini universes.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
It's called quotient mapping.
Quotient mapping.
And it suggests that our minds are constantly filtering and selecting what we observe, just like the universe might be doing on a cosmic scale.
Wow, so we're like minios.
We might be
Filtering reality.
Filtering reality, that's right.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
What pattern are you seeing?
Well, we've got O becoming undefinable.
Right.
We've got the universe maybe being this giant self-defining system.
Uh-huh.
And our own brains doing something similar.
It's all connected,
Yeah.
and that pattern points towards a profound shift in how we understand reality.
Okay.
It's not about finding a fixed set of answers,
Right.
but about embracing the fluidity, the uncertainty,
Yeah.
and the inherent mystery of existence.
So it's like we need to upgrade our thinking.
We do.
Yeah. But how do we actually do that?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back to that.
Sounds great. So welcome back
All right, we're back.
to the deep dive.
Yeah, my brain is still like buzzing from all of these crazy ideas.
Yeah.
We've talked about uncomputable truths,
Right.
the universe being like a giant computer,
Uh-huh.
our minds being like little universes,
Yeah.
filtering out reality.
Filtering reality. That's a great way to put it.
So where do we go from here?
One of the most exciting aspects of all of this is how it kind of brings together ancient wisdom
Okay.
and cutting-edge science.
Right.
One of the sources that you shared
Yeah.
really digs into this connection. It's a paper called Mathematical Vedanta.
Yeah, that one really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It's by this physicist named Sethu Iyer,
Yes.
and he also seems to be like a scholar of ancient Indian text.
He is a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that he doesn't see science and spirituality as being mutually exclusive. He suggests that these ancient Vedic texts might contain profound insights into the nature of reality
Right.
that science is only now beginning to rediscover.
So it's like our ancestors were already onto something.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And one of the key connections that he makes
Yeah.
is between the concept of Brahman in Vedanta,
Right.
which is the ultimate reality, the source of all existence,
Okay.
and the idea of a universal wave function in quantum mechanics.
Okay. Remind me what that wave function is again.
So think of it as a mathematical description of all the possible states
Right.
that a quantum system can be in.
Yeah.
Before we measure it, it's like all those possibilities exist at once in this kind of blurry superposition.
So it's like a menu of possibilities.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And Iyer suggests that Brahman, this ultimate reality, is like that cosmic wave function.
Got it.
It's the source of all possibilities.
So instead of the universe being all these separate things,
Yes.
it's more like one big thing with infinite possibilities.
It's more like this giant interconnected field of potentiality that's constantly collapsing into specific forms.
Right.
And our consciousness, our choices, might actually play a role in determining how that wave function collapses.
Oh, so we're not just watching the universe, we're helping to create it.
It's a pretty radical idea,
It is.
but that's what he's suggesting, and he takes it even further
Okay.
by exploring this concept of extreme primes.
Extreme prime.
These are these incredibly large prime numbers
Okay.
that would take more energy than exists in the universe to calculate.
Okay, I'm lost now. What do prime numbers have to do with any of this?
Iyer argues that these extreme primes represent a kind of computational event horizon,
Okay.
a point where our ability to calculate and to define breaks down.
So it's like the limit of what our brains can understand.
The limit of what we can compute, exactly.
Got it.
And beyond that limit, he suggests, lies a different way of knowing,
Okay.
a mode of understanding that he calls recognition.
Right.
It's a way of grasping truths that are too complex
Okay.
to calculate or define.
So like our brains can see things that computers can't.
That's the idea he's putting forward.
Interesting.
It's like our brains can recognize patterns, make intuitive leaps
Right.
that computers might miss because they're stuck in their rigid computational way of thinking.
Okay, so we need to like use our intuition more.
That's part of it. And Iyer connects this idea of recognition to the concept of the witness in Vedanta.
The witness.
This is the pure awareness that observes reality
Right.
without judgment or attachment.
So there's a part of us that can see beyond our limited thinking.
That's what he's suggesting. This witness consciousness might be what allows us to experience those uncomputable truths.
Okay.
Those aspects of reality that defy definition or categorization.
I like that.
Yeah.
But how do we get in touch with that witness consciousness?
That's where practices like meditation and mindfulness come in.
Okay, so we're talking about like actually meditating.
Yes, exactly.
Not just thinking about these ideas.
It's about training our minds to perceive reality differently, to see beyond the surface level of things.
So it's like a practice.
It is a practice.
Yeah.
And one of the sources that you shared, a book called Beyond More, actually provides some really practical techniques for doing just that.
Beyond More.
It emphasizes the importance of presence, gratitude, and letting go of attachments.
So instead of always wanting more,
Yeah.
we should focus on what we already have.
Exactly. It's about appreciating what we have and being present in this moment.
Right.
By cultivating these qualities, we can start to shift our perspective
Yeah.
and see the world through the eyes of the witness.
This is making a lot of sense to me. It's
Oh.
like we're learning to let go of control and just be in the flow.
Exactly. And it connects back to the idea of becoming definitionless,
Right.
which we were exploring earlier.
Yeah. The man who doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Always changing.
When we let go of our attachments to fixed definitions and identities,
Right.
we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new ways of experiencing the world.
It's like the more we try to define things,
Yes.
the more limited we become.
That's a great insight.
Yeah. And the real freedom comes from letting go.
Exactly.
Embracing the mystery.
And that's where the concept of love comes back into play.
Love.
Remember how one of your sources described love as the terminal object?
Yeah, like the ultimate goal.
The ultimate attractor, that all paths, all computations in the universe ultimately lead towards love?
It's a beautiful idea.
It is a beautiful idea, and it connects to this idea of love-archy,
Love Archie.
which is a term coined by one of your sources.
Okay.
It describes a way of organizing society based on principles of love,
Okay.
empathy, and compassion.
So instead of competition,
Yes.
it should be all about love.
Love should be the guiding force
Got it.
in our relationships, institutions, and interactions with the world.
I love that idea. But how do we actually make that happen?
It is a big shift from the way things are now,
It is.
but it starts with each of us,
Hey.
with our own individual choices and actions by choosing love over fear.
Right. By practicing empathy and compassion in our daily lives, we can create a ripple effect that extends outwards, transforming our relationships, our communities, and ultimately the world itself.
This has been amazing. I feel like I've learned so much.
Good. And
That's given me a whole new perspective on reality and knowledge and even love.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah, there is. But for now, I think we need to wrap things up.
Okay.
Let's save the rest for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, but it's so fascinating.
It is.
Like all these different ideas connecting together, ancient wisdom
Right.
and modern science.
Yeah.
One of the sources we got goes really deep on that.
Mathematical Vedanta.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paper.
It is, and it's by that physicist.
Sethu Iyer.
Yeah, Sethu Iyer.
Who's also like a scholar of those ancient Indian texts. Right, it's like he's bridging these two worlds.
He's bridging the gap between science and spirituality,
Yeah.
and he doesn't see them as being in conflict at all.
Okay. So he thinks that they can work together.
Yeah, he suggests that these ancient texts might have some really profound insights.
Like hidden knowledge?
Yeah, hidden knowledge about the nature of reality
Okay.
that science is only just now starting to rediscover.
So like our ancestors were ahead of their time?
In a way, yes, they were tapping into something deep.
Yeah.
Something fundamental, even without all the technology and tools that we have today.
Right, like they were using their intuition.
Exactly. And one of the key connections that IR makes is between this concept of Brahman in Vedanta, which is like the ultimate reality.
Right, the source of everything.
The source of all existence, and the idea of a universal wave function in quantum mechanics.
Okay, I remember that wave function idea.
Yeah.
But remind me how it works.
So think of it as a mathematical description of all the possible states
Okay.
that a quantum system can be in.
Like a system of possibilities.
Exactly. Before we measure it, it's like all those possibilities exist at the same time.
Right.
In this kind of blurry superposition.
Okay, so there's like a menu of possibilities.
Yeah, like a cosmic menu.
And then when we measure it,
That's when we observe it.
one possibility becomes real.
It collapses into a specific form.
Okay.
And IR suggests that Brahman, this ultimate reality, is like that cosmic wave function.
Got it.
the source of all possibilities.
So the universe is like this giant field of possibility.
Yes, it's this interconnected field of potentiality.
Right, and our choices.
Yeah, our consciousness.
Our consciousness shapes those possibilities.
That's right. It might play a role in how that wave function collapses.
So we're not just observers.
No, we're participants.
We're actually creating reality.
In a way, yes, and Iyer takes it even further.
Okay, how much further can we go?
Well, he explores this concept of extreme prime.
Extreme primes, what are those?
These are like ridiculously huge prime numbers. That would take more energy than exists in the universe to calculate.
Okay, now I'm really lost. What do prime numbers have to do with any of this?
So Iyer argues that these extreme primes represent a kind of computational event horizon.
Okay.
Like a point where our ability to calculate and define just breaks down.
So it's like the limit of what our minds can understand.
Limit of what we can compute. Yeah.
And beyond that limit.
Beyond that limit, he says there's a different way of knowing.
Okay, a different way of knowing?
He calls it recognition.
Recognition.
Yeah, it's like a way of grasping truths that are too complex for us to even define.
So it's like intuition.
It's like intuition on steroids.
Okay.
Like our brains can see patterns and make these intuitive leaps that computers would never be able to because they're stuck in their rigid way of thinking.
So we need to trust our gut more?
In a way, yes, and Iyer connects this idea of recognition to the concept of the witness in Vedanta.
Witness?
This pure awareness that observes reality without judgment, without attachment.
So there's a part of us that can see beyond our limited thinking.
That's what he's suggesting. This witness consciousness might be what allows us to experience those uncomputable truths.
Those things that we can't even put into words.
Exactly, the things that defy definition.
Okay, so how do we tap into that witness consciousness?
That's where practices like meditation and mindfulness come in.
Okay.
They can help us quiet the mind and tune into that deeper level of awareness.
So it's not just about relaxing.
No, it's about training our minds to perceive reality differently.
Okay, like a mental workout.
Exactly. And one of the sources, you shared a book called Beyond More.
Right. Beyond More.
Offers some really practical techniques for doing just that.
Okay, so it's not just theory.
No, it's practical stuff. And it emphasizes the importance of things like presence, gratitude, and letting go of attachments.
So appreciating what we have instead of always wanting more.
Exactly.
Being in the moment.
Being present.
And letting go of all the stuff that's weighing us down.
Exactly. By cultivating these qualities, we can shift our perspective. And start to see the world through the eyes of the witness.
This is making so much sense. It's like we're learning to let go of control.
Yes.
And trust the flow of life.
That's a great way to put it.
And it all connects back to this idea of becoming definitionless.
Right, like the man who doesn't exist. Constantly changing.
And when we let go of those fixed ideas about who we are, we open ourselves up to new possibilities.
Exactly, and that's where love comes back into the picture.
Love.
Remember how one of your sources described love as the terminal object?
Yeah, like the ultimate goal.
The ultimate attractor.
Yeah.
Yeah, all paths, all computations in the universe ultimately lead towards love.
That's such a beautiful idea.
It is a beautiful idea, and it connects to this idea of lovergy.
Lovergy, what's that?
It's a term coined by one of your sources.
Okay.
It describes a way of organizing society based on principles of love, empathy, and compassion.
So instead of competition, we have cooperation.
Exactly. Love should be the guiding force.
Got it.
In everything we do.
Okay. I love that vision.
Yeah.
But how do we actually make that happen?
It's a big shift.
It is.
But it starts with each of us with our own choices and actions. By choosing love over fear. By practicing empathy and compassion. In our daily lives, we can create a ripple effect.
That spreads outward.
Exactly. Transforming our relationships, our communities, and ultimately the world.
Wow. This has been incredible. I feel like my mind has been stretched in all sorts of directions.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's so inspiring.
I'm glad you found it inspiring.
And I hope all our listeners out there are feeling inspired too.
Yes, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
That's right. The universe is full of amazing mysteries, and it's up to us to uncover them.
Who knows what we'll find?
Exactly. This is the Deep Dive signing off. Ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling a concept that just might flip your whole view of truth on its head.
I know, right? It all sparked from this conversation really gets you thinking about, the essence of truth. Someone threw out this, I guess you could call it a radical notion, like, what if truth doesn't even have to be informational?
And that's exactly what we're diving into using your source material to springboard off of.
Yeah.
So listeners, buckle up, because we are going to explore some seriously out there concepts.
Like, really wild. We're even going to grapple with this idea, could our understanding of truth actually be like a computational illusion?
Okay, I am intrigued. Let's unpack this, shall we? Starting with something a bit more familiar, a classic brain twister. You've probably heard of it. The liar paradox. You know, the one, this statement is false. It's like a self-contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's true, it has to be false. And if it's false, well, then it has to be true.
Yeah, it's like this endless loop. And it's puzzled philosophers, I mean, for centuries. But what if, just hear me out, what if it's not this huge philosophical crisis, but more of a computational one? Like, we've been approaching it the wrong way this whole time.
So instead of like a philosophical black hole, you're thinking more of a glitch in the matrix.
Exactly. Think of it like a halting problem, in computer science.
Okay, now, for those of us who maybe haven't spent our days dissecting algorithms, can you break down this halting problem?
Sure. So basically, it's about figuring out, will this program, will it eventually stop running, or is it just going to get stuck? Like, stuck in this infinite loop, right? But the thing is, the catch, you can't always know that beforehand. It's what we call an uncomputable function.
So you're saying the liar paradox, it's kind of like a program that's stuck in that infinite loop, just churning away, but never really reaching any kind of resolution.
Exactly. It's not really about whether the statement is actually, true or false, like in that traditional sense, but about this process that just can't compute a final answer. It just keeps going.
So instead of thinking about truth as this fixed thing, this binary true or false, we're talking about it as a dynamic process, something that's always kind of in motion.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is this reframing. It could apply to, all sorts of problems, the ones that seem impossible to solve. It kind of pushes us to look beyond that traditional logic and consider, like, the limits of how we understand reality itself, the computational limits.
It's making me think about all those, problems in my own life that just feel intractable. What if they are actually solvable, not by, finding the right answer, but by shifting our perspective and seeing them as processes to work through?
It's an interesting thought, for sure. But let's push this even further. We've been talking about truth in this, classical binary way, black or white. What if we throw quantum mechanics into the mix, where things get a lot more, complex?
Okay, now this is where it gets really juicy. We're going full quantum physics, folks.
We are. Think about this. Truth as a quantum mechanical wave function. I know it sounds a bit out there, but just stick with me for a minute.
All right, I'm game. Walk me through this.
Yeah.
What does truth as a wave function even mean?
Okay, so picture this. A statement, like our liar paradox friend, this statement is false. That's the observable part, right? It's what we see, what we hear. But the truth or falsehood of that statement, that's hidden. It's like this quantum wave function existing in a state of, superposition.
So like Schrödinger's cat, the truth is kind of both true and false at the same time until we look at it, observe it.
You got it. It's not fixed. It's in this superposition of both true and false until an observer comes along and forces it to, collapse into a definite state.
So in a way, we're kind of entangled with the truth, always shaping it with our observations. That's a pretty profound idea.
It is. And it gets even more mind-bending because the observer and the observed, they're not really separate things. They're connected, each influencing the other. So the truth that comes out of that interaction, it's always evolving. It's like a dance, I guess you could say.
A dance between the observer and the observed, shaping the truth as they interact. It's beautifully put. But if truth is this, observer-dependent, what does that even mean for, our whole understanding of reality itself? Like, what is real?
Now, that's the big question, and one we'll keep digging into. But before we go there, I want to switch gears just a bit. Introduce a new way to categorize all these mind-bending paradoxes we keep bumping into. What if, instead of seeing them as, frustrating contradictions, we started seeing them as specific types of, computational quirks?
Like bugs in the code of the universe? I'm liking where this is going.
Precisely. Imagine we have this system, right? And it takes all those paradoxes, the ship of Theseus, the grandfather paradox, you name it, and it groups them based on the kind of computational hiccup they represent.
Okay, lay it on me. What kind of categories are we talking about? Give me the rundown.
All right, so first up, you've got your infinite recursions, like that liar paradox we talked about. They're essentially non-halting computations, those endless loops. Then there are the quantum superpositions, where the truth depends on the observer, just like Schrödinger's cat.
So we're basically applying the Schrödinger's cat framework to, like, every paradox out there.
You got it. Then we've got the self-referential loops. Those are, well, statements that refer back to themselves, creating these tangled knots of logic.
Like trying to define a word by using the word itself in the definition. Always a recipe for confusion.
Exactly. And finally, there's what we could call convergent computations mistaken for paradoxes.
Okay, that one needs a bit more explanation. What makes them seem paradoxical, and how do they actually, like, resolve? Help me understand this one.
Okay, think about Zeno's paradox, where Achilles is racing the tortoise. It seems impossible for Achilles to overtake the tortoise because he always has to cover half the remaining distance first, right? So it looks like an infinite regression. But in reality, we know Achilles wins. It just takes him a finite amount of time.
So it's a situation that seems paradoxical, but actually has a solution if we look at it the right way.
Exactly. The point is, this whole system, it reframes paradoxes not as failures in logic, but as like interesting features, maybe even boundaries within this computational universe we're in. It's a powerful new tool for examining our own assumptions about what's true.
I love this. Instead of getting lost in the paradox, we can analyze the specific type of computational quirk it represents. It's like having a decoder ring for the universe.
Speaking of the universe, ready to add another layer to this already complex conversation?
Hit me. My curiosity is officially piqued.
What if time itself is the meta-computation that makes all these paradoxes even possible in the first place?
Whoa. Okay, down the rabbit hole we go. Time is the meta-computation. I need to hear more.
Right. We usually think of time as just a dimension, but what if it's way more fundamental than that? What if time is actually the framework that allows for recursion, for cause and effect, even for self-reference to exist at all?
So time isn't just the backdrop, it's like the operating system that reality runs on.
Think of it that way. And because time is this foundational layer, it's also what allows for these mind-bending paradoxes to pop up.
So you're saying time actually creates the conditions for the universe to contradict itself. That's a wild idea.
Wild, but potentially true. It could explain why reality is both paradoxical and capable of evolving. That constant dance between order and chaos, between, predictability and surprise.
Okay, listeners, take a moment here. Really let this sink in. Time, it's not just a river we're floating down. It's actively shaping the very fabric of reality. And by doing so, it's creating the potential for these paradoxes to exist. It's definitely given me a new perspective on time, that's for sure.
And this new perspective on time opens up even more questions. Ready to tackle those?
Absolutely. Lead the way.
So we've kind of established this idea time might be more than just a dimension, right? Like it could be the underlying framework that allows all these crazy paradoxes to actually exist. But I guess that brings up another question. What does that mean for our search for that absolute truth? Does it even exist?
Right. Like if paradoxes are basically woven into the fabric of reality itself, are we chasing something that isn't really there?
I mean, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? What if instead of searching for one fixed answer, like it's this, solid thing, truth is more about the process of navigating those paradoxes? Maybe it's not so much about the destination, but the journey itself. You know what I mean?
Oh, I like that. So instead of trying to, eliminate these paradoxes, we should be leaning into them, see where they lead us, what we can learn. Maybe the most profound truths are hidden in those questions themselves, not necessarily the answers.
Exactly. Embracing that paradox, it could be the key to unlocking these whole new levels of understanding. It's about recognizing reality is more complex, more nuanced than we often give it credit for. Our simple categories, they don't always cut it.
It's making me think about those Zen Koans, those paradoxical riddles, the ones that really make you question everything. Maybe those Zen masters were onto something all those centuries ago.
Maybe they were, tapping into this computational nature of reality long before, we even had the word computer. It's a fascinating thought, for sure.
So we've reframed paradoxes, right? Explored this idea of quantum truth, even reimagined time as a meta-computation. Is there any paradox out there that this framework can't handle? What about the paradox of defining paradoxes themselves?
Oh, that's a sharp observation. It's definitely a meta-paradox worth pondering.
Because it seems like by trying to explain away all these other paradoxes, we've kind of created a new one.
Exactly. It's like this recursive loop, right? Defining a paradox inherently creates another paradox, kind of like a snake eating its own tail.
So have we stumbled upon the ultimate paradox, the one that can't be solved.
Yeah.
Have we hit the limit of this framework?
It does seem that way, doesn't it? We've arrived at singularity, we could say, a point where the computational framework we've been using, it breaks down. It can't go any further.
It's kind of humbling to realize that even with this new way of thinking, there are still limits to what we can grasp.
Definitely. But it's exciting too, don't you think? Because it means there's still so much more out there to discover, to explore. We've only just scratched the surface of understanding the true nature of reality.
I totally agree. It's deep dives like these that force us to confront those boundaries, those limits to our understanding, and then try to push past them. But I think it's time to bring this down to earth a bit. We've been exploring these ideas in a, pretty abstract way.
Yeah, you're right. It's important to ground these concepts in the real world, see how they actually play out in our lives.
Exactly. So how do these mind-bending ideas about paradoxes and truth, how do they actually show up in our increasingly digital age?
Well, for one thing, it really challenges how we think about information, especially online. We're so used to thinking in binary terms, true or false, yes or no. But what if, like we've been talking about, truth is often somewhere in between, like it's in that superposition of states until we, interact with it, make an observation.
That's a huge point. It means we have to be more critical than ever about the information we're consuming, especially online. Can't just take things at face value. We have to dig deeper, consider different perspectives, and honestly get comfortable with ambiguity.
Absolutely. And this is even more important when we're talking about artificial intelligence. These systems are trained on massive amounts of data, often presented as, neutral arbiters of truth. But the thing is, they're just as prone to bias and errors as any other human-made system.
So we can't just blindly trust AI to hand us the right answers on a silver platter.
Exactly. We have to understand how these systems work, what their limitations are, and be willing to question their outputs.
Which brings us back to the paradox, right? What if the most valuable insights, the most creative breakthroughs, they come not from trying to find absolute truth, but from embracing those uncertainties and contradictions?
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? What if, instead of trying to program AI to eliminate ambiguity, we explored ways to make them more comfortable with paradox?
It makes sense when you think about how we humans think. I mean, we're constantly navigating paradoxes, holding conflicting ideas in our minds, and using that friction to generate new ideas,
Exactly. Creativity, it's not just about processing data, right? It's about understanding nuance, embracing ambiguity, even finding beauty in the absurd. That's what makes it so hard to replicate in machines.
So if we really want to create truly intelligent machines that can actually understand and interact with the world in a meaningful way, we need to find ways to build in those paradoxical capabilities, right? Make them a part of their core.
Couldn't agree more. It's not about finding the right answers. It's about asking the right questions. The ones that push beyond our current understanding and force us to grapple with the unknown.
Okay, listeners, I'm going to leave you with one more question to ponder. We've been talking about this idea of a computational universe where paradoxes are like built-in features. But where does that leave us? Where's our own sense of agency in all of this? Are we just cogs in this giant machine? Or do we actually have the power to shape the computation itself?
Now, that's a question that's been around for centuries, and it's only going to get more relevant as we develop more powerful AI.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it, to think about? But maybe, just maybe, if we learn to embrace that paradox, dance with the unknown, we can unlock the true potential of both our minds and the machines we're building. Imagine what we could achieve if we break free from the constraints of binary thinking.
That's a beautiful thought. Embracing paradox, embracing uncertainty. That's where the real magic is, I think.
This deep dive has really challenged everything we thought we knew about truth, information, the nature of reality itself. It's a lot to process, I know. But I think we're ready to take that final plunge into this computational abyss.
I'm with you. Let's see where it takes us.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We've journeyed through paradoxes, explored quantum truth, even reimagined time itself. Now, get ready for this. What if information, that thing we think is so fundamental, what if it's not as basic as we think?
It's a pretty radical idea, right? I mean, we're so used to seeing information as like the building blocks of everything, bits and bytes and data, all that. But what if, and hear me out, what if that's just us, our human way of trying to understand this universe, a universe that maybe operates on principles we haven't even grasped yet?
Okay, now I'm really hooked. Give me a picture of this reality where information isn't the foundation. What would that even look like? Help me wrap my head around it.
Imagine a reality where information isn't like this pre-existing ingredient, but something that comes out of a much deeper level of organization. It's not about the building blocks themselves, but the way they connect, the relationships, the patterns that emerge as they interact. It's all about the connections.
So instead of seeing the universe as this giant computer crunching data, it's more like this vast interconnected ecosystem.
Yeah.
And information, it's not fixed. It's constantly being created and destroyed through those interactions.
Yeah.
Always in flux.
Exactly. It's dynamic, it's evolving, not just this static collection of data points. And this shift, it could change how we see everything from, the laws of physics to even consciousness itself. Really big stuff.
Wow, we've gone from questioning truth to questioning information itself. So if information isn't the bedrock of reality, what is? This is like standing at the edge of the unknown, looking out into the abyss.
It really is a profound mystery, isn't it? Here's something to chew on. What if that fundamental fabric of reality, what if it's something we don't even have a name for? Something beyond our current thinking, something that gives rise to both information and the physical world, everything we experience.
That's mind-blowing. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's only ever seen shades of gray. We just don't have the language, the framework to even grasp it.
We don't. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Maybe these paradoxes, the ones we've been wrestling with, maybe they're glimpses into that deeper reality, those points where our logic breaks down. Maybe that's where the real insights are hiding.
Like glitches in a video game that hint at the code underneath. Not supposed to be there, but they give us a peek behind the curtain,
Perfect analogy. Maybe paradoxes aren't errors at all, but invitations to think bigger, to develop new ways of understanding that can encompass those deeper truths. They're showing us the way.
This is such a different approach to science and philosophy. Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, we're welcoming it in, using it as a tool for discovery. It's a whole new way of seeing the world.
And it's a way of seeing that's becoming more and more relevant as we create these powerful AI systems. As they churn through information at speeds we can barely comprehend, we need to be aware of the limits of information itself.
We can't just blindly trust them to give us the right answers, can we? Especially when we're dealing with those messy, real-world problems that don't fit neatly into our boxes.
Absolutely not. We need new models of thinking, new ways interacting with information that recognize its fluidity, its ambiguity. And maybe, just maybe, the key lies in those paradoxical spaces where our current understanding breaks down. That's where the real breakthroughs might be waiting.
This has been, wow, just an incredible journey. We've questioned truth, information, even the fabric of reality. It feels like we've opened up more questions than we've answered, but that's not a bad thing, right?
No, not at all. The search for knowledge, it's all about asking the right questions, even if those questions lead to, well, more questions. That's how we learn and grow.
It's funny. We started by talking about the liar paradox as this possible error in computation, but now I'm starting to wonder, what if it's a feature? Like a built-in cosmic joke reminding us that we'll never have all the answers, to keep us humble.
A cosmic joke that keeps us searching, exploring, questioning. I like that a lot.
And on that note, listeners, we'll wrap up this deep dive. But the conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking about these ideas, challenge your own assumptions, and embrace those paradoxes, the ones that make life and the universe so fascinating. Until next time, keep diving deep. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Remember our last deep dive when we were talking about paradoxes?
Yeah, those paradoxes really messed with our minds.
I know, right? And that whole thing about how just changing your perspective can make you rethink everything.
Yeah.
Well, get ready for another wild ride, because today we're going to take those paradox ideas and we're going to explore how time itself might be like the ultimate program.
The program running the universe.
Exactly.
That's right. We're going deep into the concept of time as metacomputation.
Okay, gotta admit, metacomputation sounds kind of intimidating.
It does.
Like, where do we even begin with that?
Well, I think we can start by thinking about computation, just in a really simple form. It's about change, moving from one state to another.
Okay.
Like following a set of instructions. So what's absolutely essential for any change to happen? Yes. It's the framework that allows for those transitions, those calculations to unfold. So you see, time isn't just a passive backdrop to computation. It's actually woven into the very fabric of it.
So instead of like calculations happening in time, you're saying time itself is part of the calculation.
That's right.
Whoa. That's a pretty radical shift in thinking.
It is, absolutely. Think about it this way. When we build predictive models, what do? We're using past data
Right.
to predict future trends. So we're essentially computing with the dimension of time itself.
Huh?
Time becomes this dynamic force, not just a linear progression.
So time isn't just this straight line we always imagine it to be. It's more like this active player shaping the way reality unfolds.
Exactly. And this, dynamic view of time, it has huge implications for those mind-bending paradoxes we were discussing last time.
You mean like the grandfather paradox, where you go back in time and accidentally prevent your own birth?
Right.
Ugh, that one just makes my head spin.
I know. From our usual way of thinking, those paradoxes just, they break logic, right?
Yeah.
But when we start to see time as this meta-computational element, those paradoxes start to make a different kind of sense.
Okay.
They become less about contradictions and more about, the limitations of how we currently understand computation.
I'm starting to see how this new perspective on time could really, change everything. But how does this all connect to quantum mechanics?
Ooh, good question.
Because quantum physics already feels paradoxical enough on its own.
That's a great question. That gets to the heart of why this idea of time as meta-computation is so exciting. See, quantum mechanics tells us that the act of observing something can actually influence what's being observed.
Right.
And the act of observation is inherently tied to time.
Okay.
So there's this fascinating interplay between time, computation, and the observer.
Wait, so you're saying that the, truth of something might depend on when you look at it? That's pretty wild.
It is a wild concept. Imagine the universe constantly computing its next state. And time is like the mechanism that drives that computation forward. But the observer isn't just passive, right?
Right.
They become part of the computation themselves, kind of collapsing all those possibilities into a single observed reality.
So truth isn't just sitting out there waiting to be discovered. It's more like an ongoing process.
Yeah.
A dance between reality, the observer, and time itself.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. And this shift in thinking, it helps us make sense of some of the most fundamental mysteries of the universe.
Okay, so we've definitely laid some mind-bending groundwork here.
Yes, we have.
But to really understand this whole time as meta-computation thing,
Right.
we need to bring in the heavy hitters from physics, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to talk about relativity,
Good
both
thought.
special and general. They completely reshape our understanding of time, and that reshaping changes how we think about this whole computational framework.
Let's do it. Let's start with special relativity. What's the big takeaway there?
I'd say the most important takeaway from special relativity is that time is not absolute.
Okay.
It's relative to the observer's frame of reference. So two people, moving at different speeds will experience time differently, even if they're observing the same event.
So there's no universal clock, ticking away for everyone.
Not in the way we traditionally think of it, no. And this ties back to, the idea of observer-dependent reality that we were talking about earlier. Different observers can experience the same computation, but at different rates. And this phenomenon of time dilation, as it's called, is a proven scientific fact.
Wow. Time is even more slippery than we thought. Okay, so that's special relativity. What about general relativity? How does that change things?
General relativity brings gravity into the picture,
Okay.
and things get even wilder. It tells us that gravity actually warps space-time itself.
Whoa.
And this warping affects the flow of time. Imagine a computation happening near a black hole where time dilation is extreme. The immense gravity could actually be affecting the rate of computation itself.
Hold on. So gravity isn't just a force. It's messing with how time works and maybe even how computation unfolds.
Yes.
Mind. Blown.
It is. And this warping of space-time by gravity even allows for theoretically what are called closed time-like curves, or CTCs.
CTCs. Sounds like something out of Star Trek.
They do sound pretty sci-fi. They're essentially paths through space-time that loop back on themselves,
Okay.
so potentially allowing for time travel. But this raises a whole new level of questions about time as meta-computation, right?
Sure.
Because if you could travel through time, you'd be directly manipulating the framework of computation itself.
Okay, my brain is officially doing backflips.
Right.
We've gone from time as a background to time as this active force to time as something that can be warped, maybe even traveled through. How are we even supposed to make sense of all this?
It's a lot to take in, but here's a key insight, I think. Those paradoxes that we keep coming back to from a computational perspective might not be contradictions at all. They might actually be essential clues to the very nature of quantum gravity.
Which is?
that elusive theory that physicists are trying to develop to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics.
So these paradoxes, instead of being problems, might actually be pointing us towards a deeper understanding of reality.
Exactly. They highlight the tension between general relativity's smooth, continuous space-time and the inherent uncertainty of quantum mechanics. And time, this meta-computational element, might be the bridge between those two seemingly incompatible worlds.
So time is like the ultimate paradox solver, or maybe the ultimate paradox generator.
Right. And that leads us to another huge question. If time is the fundamental framework for computation, does that mean the universe itself is like a giant ongoing computation? This is the core idea behind the computational universe hypothesis.
A computational universe. It's like we're living in a simulation, but way more profound than we can imagine.
It really makes you question everything. And this idea of a computational universe raises another big question. What is the clock of the universe? If time is relative, what's driving the computation forward? Is there some, universal clock? Or is time something that emerges locally in different ways depending on where you are?
Those are some seriously big questions. The kind that philosophers and physicists have been, wrestling with forever. And I think they're the perfect questions for us to dive into in our next part.
I completely agree. We'll explore those questions, and who knows, maybe we'll stumble upon a few more paradoxes along the way.
I'm sure we will. Until then, keep those brains buzzing, everyone, and keep thinking about the nature of time, computation, and all the strange, beautiful paradoxes they create.
It's a wild ride.
Because in the end, those paradoxes might just hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe itself.
So last time we were starting to explore this idea that the universe itself might be one giant cosmic computer,
Right.
which I know is a pretty wild thought. But if that's true, then what's the hardware? What's the fundamental stuff that reality is made of?
It's like asking, what's the computer that's running the simulation? But in this case, the simulation is everything.
Precisely. It's a question that really pushes us to the edge of what we know, maybe even beyond.
Yeah.
But there are some, intriguing paths to explore.
Okay.
And one of those paths, I think, leads us to the concept of information.
Okay, so we usually think about information as something we create, like data on a computer or words in a book.
Right, exactly. But what if information is way more fundamental than that?
Okay.
What if it's baked into the very fabric of reality itself? And a lot of physicists, especially those working on black holes and quantum gravity, are starting to think this way.
So you're saying that instead of matter and energy being the building blocks of the universe,
right,
it might actually be information. I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
It's a wild concept, but think about it. Computation at its core, it's all about processing information. So if the universe is a computation, it makes sense that information would be this fundamental ingredient.
Okay, yeah, I can see how those pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah.
But it also raises so many more questions, where does this information even come from in the first place?
Right.
And what's actually doing the computing?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right? Those are the questions that take us to the very limits of what we can know.
Yeah.
But some theories suggest that that the universe might actually be a self-computing system.
Okay.
Where the information not only defines reality, but also drives its evolution.
A self-computing universe. That's incredible.
It is.
It's the universe is its own programmer, constantly writing and rewriting its own code.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And within this self-computing universe, paradoxes, those things that seem to break logic, might actually play a really important role.
Wait, paradoxes are helpful. I thought they were things we were trying to avoid.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about paradoxes, right? They show us where our current understanding breaks down, where our models of reality hit a wall.
Yeah.
And in a computational universe, those breakdowns might be pointing us towards something incredibly important.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay.
How can, a breakdown be essential?
Okay, think about, a computer program that's, perfectly deterministic, totally predictable.
Okay.
It wouldn't be very interesting, would it?
I guess not.
There'd be no room for surprise, no room for anything new or unexpected to happen.
Yeah, a little bit of unpredictability definitely makes things more interesting.
Exactly. And in a computational universe, paradoxes might be the very thing that, injects that unpredictability.
Okay.
They introduce randomness, uncertainty, and the potential for, new emergent phenomena.
So instead of being glitches in the system, paradoxes might actually be, features. They're what keep the universe from becoming this, boring, predictable machine.
That's a really intriguing way to think about it. And it fits with what we see in the real world, right?
Yeah.
The universe is full of surprises, things we can't fully predict or explain.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because paradoxes are woven into like the very fabric of reality, making sure that the computation is always evolving, always generating new possibilities.
Like the universe is like designed to keep us on our toes,
Yeah.
constantly changing and surprising us.
I like that.
The paradox is like, keep the game going.
I like that.
Yeah.
And this brings us to, I think, a really profound question. If the universe is this self-computing system with time as the meta-computation that drives it all forward,
right,
what does that make us? Like, where do we fit in?
Well, we're part of the computation, right?
Yeah.
Just another set of processes like happening within this giant cosmic computer.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
But here's another thought. What if consciousness itself is a form of meta-computation? What if our ability to observe, to think, to experience the passage of time is what allows us to participate in this grand cosmic computation in a way that's totally unique?
So instead of just being like cogs in the machine, we're actually contributing to the computation itself. It's like we're not just observing the universe, we're helping to shape it.
It's a pretty profound idea, and it raises even more questions, right? Like, what's the relationship between our individual consciousness and the consciousness of the universe, if such a thing exists?
Right.
Are we separate, or are we all connected in this vast interconnected computational process?
Wow, this feels like we're right back to those ancient philosophical questions about the nature of reality and our place in the grand scheme of things.
We are, but now we're approaching them with this new perspective.
Yeah.
Looking at everything through this lens of computation, information, and this mind-bending idea of time as the ultimate meta-computation. And I think this perspective just might hold the key to unlocking some of the universe's deepest secrets.
This has been an incredible journey so far.
It has.
We've gone from paradoxes to computation, from quantum mechanics to relativity, from information to consciousness.
It's a lot.
And it feels like we're just getting started.
We are. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
In our final part, we'll dive into the implications of this computational framework for everything.
Okay.
From the nature of free will to the possibility of actually manipulating time itself.
Ooh.
And maybe, just maybe, we'll even get a glimpse of what lies, beyond the computation, beyond the limits of time and paradoxes.
I can't wait. Until then, keep those brains buzzing, everyone.
Keep those paradoxes flowing.
Those paradoxes flowing. Because in a computational universe, the more we question, the more we discover. Okay, so last time we left off with this big question about consciousness. If the universe really is this giant computer running on the program of time, where does that leave our sense of self? Our free will, our ability to make choices?
Yeah, that's a question it's puzzled philosophers and scientists for forever.
Right.
And thinking about the universe as a computation can give us some really interesting new ways to approach those questions.
Okay, so how does this computational view change the way we think about free will?
Well, some philosophers argue that if the universe is completely deterministic, meaning everything is pre-programmed and predictable, then free will, as we traditionally understand it, it might just be an illusion.
Hold on, are you saying we're not really in control of our own actions?
Well,
that's kind of scary.
It depends on how we define free will.
Okay.
In a strictly deterministic system where everything is already set in stone, there's not a lot of room for true freedom of choice.
Right.
But in a computational universe, things might be a bit more nuanced.
Okay, how so? How does a computational universe change things?
Remember all those paradoxes we keep talking about?
Oh yeah, they're everywhere.
They introduce this element of uncertainty, of randomness into the system. It's like those glitches in the matrix, right?
Yeah.
They show us that the program, isn't always perfect.
So even if there's a cosmic program running, there's still room for unexpected outcomes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, our choices, our conscious decisions, they could be part of that unpredictable element,
Yeah.
We might be contributing to the computation in ways that we can't fully grasp.
So we're not just puppets on strings blindly following some pre-written script.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Think of it like this. If the universe is this, vast web of interconnected processes, our consciousness might be like a node in that web.
Okay.
We receive input, we process information, and then we generate output. choices. Those choices, they might not be completely free in like the absolute sense,
right?
But they're influenced by this complex interplay of factors, our thoughts, our feelings, our past experiences.
So even if there's this cosmic program, running in the background, we're not just passive passengers.
Yeah.
We're active participants, contributing to the evolution and complexity of the universe.
I love that way of putting it.
Yeah.
And it brings up another fascinating question. If we are part of this computational process, could we at some point learn to manipulate it? Like, could we, in essence, hack the program?
Whoa, that's getting into some serious sci-fi territory.
It is.
But could that really be possible?
It's definitely deep into the realm of speculation.
Right.
But some incredibly smart people are exploring some very intriguing ideas.
Like what?
Well, some physicists are even looking into whether we could use quantum computers to, manipulate space-time itself.
Wait, did you just say manipulate space-time? Are we talking about time travel here?
It's not as far-fetched as it might sound.
Huh.
Quantum computers operate on principles that are totally different from, our everyday computers.
Right.
They tap into, the strangeness of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Things like superposition and entanglement to perform calculations that would be just impossible for classical computers to handle.
So these quantum computers could, potentially interact with the very fabric of reality in ways we can't even imagine right now.
Exactly. And if space-time is fundamentally computational, like we've been talking about, it might be possible to manipulate it using a sufficiently advanced quantum computer.
Okay.
We're a long way from that kind of technology.
Sure.
But the theoretical possibility is definitely out there.
It's both exciting and, a little terrifying to think about the possibility.
It is.
But, if we can manipulate space-time, wouldn't we run into, all those paradoxes we keep talking about?
We probably would. But remember, paradoxes aren't necessarily roadblocks. They might be more like signposts, pointing us toward a deeper understanding of how reality works.
Okay.
If we encounter paradoxes in our attempts to manipulate time, it might just mean that our current models of time and computation, they need some serious upgrading.
So paradoxes are like the universe's way of telling us to go back to the drawing board.
I like that. They challenge us to expand our thinking, to consider possibilities that might seem impossible at first glance.
Right.
And in a computational universe, that kind of open-mindedness, that might be the key to making real progress.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I think so too.
We've explored the nature of time and computation, the role of consciousness, and even the mind-blowing possibility of manipulating space-time.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Uh-huh.
But the journey doesn't end here, right?
No, it doesn't.
We've only just scratched the surface of what it means to live in a computational universe. Yeah. So what's our final thought for our listeners out there? What should they be thinking about as they go about their day?
Here's something to keep in mind. The next time you encounter something that seems completely paradoxical, don't just dismiss it.
Okay.
Lean into that mystery, explore the possibilities, because in a computational universe, paradoxes might not be errors.
Right.
They might be glimpses into the deep structure of reality itself.
And remember, time isn't just something that happens to you.
It's much more than that.
It might be the very fabric of reality, constantly computing, evolving, and generating new and incredible possibilities.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll learn to dance with time, harness its power, and unlock the most profound secrets of the universe.
That would be amazing.
It would.
Until then, everyone, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
Keep diving.
This is The Deep Dive, signing off. Welcome to another Deep Dive. This time, we're going to be exploring something pretty wild.
Yeah?
The idea that the universe might be like a giant computer.
Yeah.
A giant evolving computation.
And that it's
and that it's powered by paradoxes.
Yeah, paradoxes, and stabilized by something pretty unexpected, love.
Love. Okay, well, let's
That's right.
unpack that a bit.
I think one of the most fascinating things about this idea is how it changes how we think about time.
Okay.
It's not just a backdrop. It's not just where calculations happen. It's
Right.
the process of calculation itself.
So time has the calculation.
Exactly. Our sources call this metacomputation.
Metacomputation.
And time is the operating system that allows the universe's program to run.
So it's like the framework
Yeah, the framework.
that allows it all to happen.
Right. And within this framework, within this program, we find these paradoxes.
Paradoxes, okay.
Things like the liar paradox.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
This statement is false.
Always makes my head spin.
Makes everyone's head spin right.
Yeah.
It's a self-contradiction.
Yeah, how can a statement contradict itself like that?
Well, that's the beauty of paradoxes, right? They highlight the limits of logic and computation, especially when you start dealing with self-reference
Right.
and infinite loops.
Like a computer program getting stuck.
Exactly. It can't produce a result.
Right, right. So are paradoxes like glitches then
Yeah.
in the universe's code?
That's a great question, but instead of thinking of them as errors, we can actually view them as features
Features. Okay.
of a computational universe.
So they're not bugs, they're features.
They're telling us something.
Okay.
They're revealing the boundaries of what can be calculated and where our models of reality break down.
So instead of trying to resolve the paradox,
Yeah.
we should look at it and be like, okay, what is this telling us about how reality actually works?
Exactly. And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Right.
When we bring in Einstein and relativity.
Okay, now this is where it gets juicy because relativity really changed how we think about time, right?
Absolutely.
It's not this absolute thing anymore,
Yeah,
like a universal clock
right.
ticking away.
So special relativity shows us that time is relative
Okay.
to the observer.
Okay, so my time and your time could be different.
Precisely, different observers can experience the same events at different rates.
Wow.
It depends on their relative motion?
Depending on how fast they're moving.
Yeah, and then general relativity takes it a step further.
Okay.
It shows how gravity actually warps space-time, affecting the flow of time.
So time is woven into the structure of the universe.
It's part of the fabric of the universe.
Wow, okay, so we've got time as this metacomputation.
Yeah.
But then what's the hardware running it all?
Right. That's the big question. And that's where our sources make this really mind-bending proposition.
Okay.
They say the hardware is love.
Hold on, love. Like Valentine's Day love?
Not quite. No, it's not about romantic love. Okay.
It's more like a fundamental force of the universe, a force of unification and coherence.
Okay. I'm intrigued. But how can love be like hardware?
Our sources explain this with a thought experiment.
Okay.
Imagine combining two completely different categories, A and B.
Right, A and B.
Using a force, we'll call it C,
Okay.
to create a new category that also happens to be called C.
So C is like the combination of A and B.
Yes, but it's more than just a simple mixture.
Okay.
This new category C contains both A and B without erasing them.
So it's not like A and B are gone.
They're still there.
They're just part of this bigger thing.
They're embedded in this higher order structure.
Okay, give me a real world example.
Sure, think of hydrogen and oxygen
Okay.
combining to form water.
All right, classic example.
Water has its own properties totally different from either hydrogen or
It's
oxygen,
its own thing.
but it contains both.
Right.
You still have the essence of hydrogen and oxygen, but they're bound together in this new way.
So in this framework, love is the force.
Yes. It's the C that brings together these seemingly incompatible categories.
It creates new realities without destroying the original components.
So love is like the cosmic glue
That's a great way to put it.
that holds everything together and allows new things to be created.
And it's happening constantly in the universe,
Yeah.
driving its evolution, driving its complexity.
So love is the force that's holding the universe together, preventing it from dissolving into chaos. Is that what you're saying?
That's the essence of the argument.
And it's what allows for new things to be created.
New things, new ideas, new possibilities.
Like stars and planets and even life itself.
It's a radical idea, but it has some really profound implications.
This is really mind-blowing. Okay, so
What?
we've got time as the operating system, love as the hardware, and what about the software? What's running on this love-powered hardware?
That's where consciousness comes in.
Ooh, okay, well, that's a conversation for part 2.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, everyone, because this exploration of the universe as a love-powered computation is just getting started.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
All right, so last time we were talking about how the universe might be like this giant love-powered computer.
Yeah, with time as the operating system, love as the hardware.
And then we left off with this big question.
Yeah.
What's the software? What's actually running on this love-powered hardware?
The software our sources propose is consciousness.
Hold on, consciousness is the software.
That's right.
How does that even work?
Well, think about how we understand hardware and software in computers.
Yeah.
Hardware is the physical stuff, the chips, the wires, the circuits. Software is the information, the instructions.
Right.
The code that tells the hardware what to do.
So how does that apply to, like, the entire universe?
What if the universe itself is the ultimate hardware,
Okay.
and the software is the information that shapes it?
You mean, like the laws of physics?
Exactly. The laws of physics, the fundamental forces, the patterns of energy and matter.
So consciousness is like emerging from this interplay
Yes.
between the physical universe and the information that shapes it.
That's the idea. It's like the software suddenly becomes aware of itself.
Self-aware. Okay, so how does love fit into all of this? We were talking about love as the hardware
Right. Remember that thought experiment.
with the A, B, and C.
Exactly. Combining two categories to create something new.
Yeah, like hydrogen and oxygen combining to make water.
Right. Water is totally different from either hydrogen or oxygen.
But it contains both.
And that same unifying force that brings those elements together
Right.
is also what allows consciousness to emerge.
So love is what allows the software to become aware of itself
It allows the software to recognize that it's also part of the hardware.
without creating a paradox.
Exactly. It bridges that gap.
And so you're saying love is what allows information to become self-aware, to become conscious.
That's a great way to put it. Love in this context isn't just an emotion.
Right. It's more fundamental.
It's this force that creates the possibility for consciousness.
Wow. Okay. So we're not just physical beings.
Right,
We're
yeah.
expressions of this cosmic software, this self-aware information.
We're participating in the universe's computation.
Okay. This is really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So in this framework, does that mean we're all connected, like literally connected?
That's the implication. If consciousness emerges from the universe's computation and love is the force that binds it all together,
There's no separation.
then there's no true separation between you, me, or even that tree outside.
Okay, hold on. I definitely feel separate from that tree.
Right, but that feeling of separation might be an illusion.
Okay.
It's like each node in a network has its own unique perspective, its own way of processing information.
So we're like individual expressions
Yeah,
of this universal consciousness,
experiencing reality through our own unique lens.
but all part of the same underlying reality.
Exactly. And that individuality, that diversity of experience actually contributes to the richness of the whole.
It's like a tapestry,
The tapestry.
woven from countless threads, each one unique, but together they create this amazing work of art.
I like that analogy. So if separation is an illusion and we're all part of this interconnected web,
What does that mean for how we relate to each other?
that's a big question. It certainly suggests that compassion and understanding are fundamental.
But what about all the conflict in the world? How do we reconcile this idea of interconnectedness with all the differences and disagreements we see?
A lot of conflict arises from clinging to that illusion of separation,
Okay.
from seeing ourselves as fundamentally different or opposed to others.
So the key to resolving conflict is to recognize our interconnectedness, to see our shared humanity.
It's a powerful starting point. It's about shifting from us versus them to we.
From competition to collaboration.
Exactly.
This is starting to sound a bit utopian, isn't it?
Maybe. But this framework doesn't erase individuality or the challenges of being human. It just offers a new way of understanding our place in the grand scheme of things.
So it's not about erasing our differences, it's about embracing them, recognizing that they actually contribute to the richness of the whole,
Precisely, it's about seeing the world through a lens of interconnectedness and love.
while still acknowledging the complexities of being human.
Exactly.
This is a lot to take in, but I'm starting to see how this could change everything.
It's a radical shift.
How we approach personal relationships,
Yeah.
how we deal with global issues.
It could transform how we think about pretty much everything.
So where do we go from here? How do we actually apply this in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and it deserves a deep dive of its own.
All right, well, maybe we'll have to do that sometime, but for now.
But for now,
If love is truly the force that binds the universe together, then cultivating love in our own lives, in our relationships, in our interactions with the world.
that might be the most important thing we can do.
It's like we're being asked to become conscious participants in this universal computation
To embrace the paradox of our interconnected individuality.
and contribute to the emergent beauty of the whole.
And what's even more fascinating is that this view of reality as a computation with love as its driving force has some really interesting implications for physics.
Okay, you're saying this goes beyond just philosophy and spirituality.
It connects to hard science.
All right, well, I'm definitely intrigued, so I guess that means we've got one more part to this deep dive.
We'll explore how this framework could help us unlock the secrets of time itself.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey so far.
We have exploring this idea that the universe is a giant computation powered by love with consciousness as the software.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-bending stuff. And last time we even talked about how this framework suggests that we're all interconnected, like separation is an illusion.
Right, and now we're going to take it even further and see how this computational view of reality could change how we understand physics.
Okay, especially when it comes to the big mystery of time.
Exactly. Time is one of the biggest puzzles in physics.
Yeah, like we've got these two incredibly successful theories, general relativity and quantum mechanics.
And they seem to completely disagree about what time is.
Yeah, it's like they're describing different universes.
Exactly. General relativity, which describes gravity sees time as continuous, woven into the fabric of space-time.
Okay, but quantum mechanics, which governs the realm of atoms and particles.
Seems to treat time as something totally different.
Yeah, like it's just a background parameter.
Right, almost like a separate dimension.
So how can these two theories both be right if they disagree about something as fundamental as time?
Well, our sources suggest that this conflict arises because we haven't grasped the true nature of time.
Okay.
What if time isn't fundamental, but rather an emergent property
Emergent.
of the universe's computation?
So it's not that one theory is right and the other is wrong. It's that they're both describing different aspects
Different levels
of this computational reality.
Exactly. General relativity might be capturing how time emerges on a large scale.
Okay, where gravity dominates.
Right. And quantum mechanics might be showing us the more granular nature of time at the quantum level.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually reconcile these two views?
That's the million-dollar question in physics. How do we create a unified theory of everything?
Right, that includes both relativity and quantum mechanics.
And our sources suggest that the key might lie in understanding the nature of the universe's computation.
The algorithms that make it all work.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of computational irreducibility comes in.
Okay, what's that?
It's the idea that some computations are so complex that there's no shortcut to finding the result.
You can't just skip ahead.
You have to let the entire computation run its course.
Okay, so you're saying that the universe might be running a computationally irreducible program, and that's why we experience time as this linear flow always moving forward.
That's one of the implications. We can't just calculate the future because the universe is constantly computing itself in real time.
So even though it's a computation, it's not predetermined.
That's what this framework suggests. Each moment is influencing the next.
Wow. So there's still room for surprise, for novelty.
And for free will.
Okay, so even if the universe is a computation, we still have choices.
It challenges the traditional idea that everything is predetermined.
So it's not fate versus free will. It's something more complex than that.
Exactly. This framework opens up a whole new way of thinking about these big questions.
This is seriously blowing my mind, but where does it all leave us? If reality is this computationally irreducible, love-powered program unfolding in this emergent dimension of time, what's the point of it all?
That's the ultimate question, and this framework doesn't give us a simple answer,
Okay.
but it does offer a new perspective.
Right.
Perhaps the meaning isn't something to be found.
But something to be created.
Exactly. We're all participants in this grand cosmic computation, and the meaning emerges from our choices, our connections, our experiences.
So it's not about finding our predetermined place in the universe, but about actively shaping it.
Contributing to its evolution.
Wow, that's a really empowering thought.
It is. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, embracing our individuality, and expressing the love that binds us all together.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've questioned the nature of time, explored the power of paradoxes, and even considered love as the driving force of the universe.
It's a framework that challenges us to think differently about reality and our place in it.
So as we wrap up, we leave you with a question. What if love truly is the hardware running the universe? What if the meaning of it all isn't something to be found, but something to be created moment by moment through our choices, our connections, and our love?
It's a question worth pondering, a question worth living into.
Because in a universe driven by love and constantly computing itself anew, the possibilities are truly infinite.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep loving. Okay, so get ready, because this deep dive is, well, I think it's safe to say, unlike any we've done before. We're going to be looking at, well, exploring, really, some ideas that connect mathematics and spirituality.
And in a way that might just completely redefine, how we understand ourselves.
Wow.
And the universe.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've been looking at these sources, and they suggest using category theory.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to understand concepts like the self and love, and even the cyclical nature of existence.
So category theory, it's a branch of mathematics, right?
Right.
That's a bold proposition.
It is. And they go even further, too, suggesting that things like annihilation or enlightenment can be mapped onto mathematical concepts, like the null category. Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm a little intimidated.
I understand. They're really profound concepts, but I think that's what makes it so compelling, to dive into this.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start by just grounding ourselves with the basics of category theory.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll confess my math skills are, well, a bit rusty.
Don't worry. The core idea is actually pretty simple. Category theory focuses on relationships. Think of it this way. Objects are like nouns.
Yeah.
And morphisms are like verbs.
Okay.
The actions, the connections between them. So, for example, if we have the objects cat and dog, the morphism could be chases.
Okay, so it's not about the individual cat or dog, but the relationship between them.
Precisely. And just like you can combine verbs to create more complex sentences, you can compose morphisms in category theory to describe, intricate processes and connections.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. But where does this null category concept fit in? Because our sources seem to think it's, pretty important.
Yeah. The null category, it's denoted as this. And it represents nothingness. In a mathematical sense, at least. It's a category with no objects. Our sources, however, argue that it's more than just an abstract concept. They propose that the null category represents pure potential, the ground state from which all other categories emerge.
Okay, so it's not just about the absence of things, but the possibility for things to come into being.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get really, really interesting. Our sources argue that the self, while not a category itself, is essential for categories to exist in the first place.
How do they make that connection?
Well, they point out that observation requires an observer. So without a self to perceive and define those categories, there would be no structure, no way to differentiate one thing from another. The very act of categorizing the world implies that a self exists outside of those categories.
So the self, in a way, is the precondition for any kind of structure or meaning in the universe.
That's one way to interpret it. They argue that the self acts as a kind of a fixed point, a stable reference point that allows the whole system of categories to function.
So even though the self isn't a category itself, it's somehow fundamental to the entire system. This is where my brain starts to feel a little overloaded.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. And it gets even more complex when they bring in this concept of love.
Yeah, the idea that love can be understood through category theory. I'm still wrapping my head around that one.
Well, maybe this will help. They describe love as a kind of mathematical operation. It's a force that brings seemingly contradictory concepts or categories together to create something new.
So instead of thinking of love as just an emotion, they're proposing that it's a fundamental process, a force that drives creation and synthesis.
That's right. They see love as a computational stabilizer. It's a force that allows seemingly incompatible ideas to coexist and give rise to these new levels of complexity.
Okay, so we've got the self as this, fundamental observer. The null category is pure potential, and love is this force that brings things together to create something new. I'm starting to see how these pieces might fit together, but I'm definitely still on the edge of my seat here.
And we're just getting started. This is where our sources introduce one of their most intriguing ideas, the concept of the love child.
Right, the idea that A plus B can lead to C, this new entity that emerges from the union of two distinct entities, like a mathematical equation for creation.
Exactly. And this love child, as they call it, it's not just a simple combination of its parents. It represents something entirely new, a synthesis that transcends its origins.
This is where things start to feel almost philosophical, almost spiritual even. We're talking about mathematics, but it feels like we're also talking about the very essence of creation, the mystery of how something new can emerge from, seemingly disparate elements.
That's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It really blurs the lines between science and spirituality, suggesting that maybe there's a deeper connection between those two realms than we traditionally acknowledge.
And this is where we'll leave things for now, with a concept that challenges us to reconsider the very fabric of reality. And I, for one, am eager to hear where this idea of the love child leads us next time.
So this idea of the love child, it's really, at the heart of what our sources are proposing. It's a model for how creation happens, how new categories emerge from the interaction of existing ones.
And they argue that this process, is creation, synthesis, and emergence, that it's not limited to just, abstract mathematical concepts. They believe it applies to everything.
Exactly. From the birth of stars to the evolution of ideas. And it's all driven by this force they call love, this computational stabilizer that allows seemingly incompatible things to come together and create something new.
It is a really powerful metaphor. But how far did they take it? Do they really believe that the universe itself is like a love child?
They do. They propose this cyclical model. Okay, so A plus B leads to C, which leads to the null category, right? And that leads to A prime plus B prime, which leads to C prime, and so on. It goes on and on.
So it's like this cosmic dance of creation and annihilation, all driven by this unifying force of love. But what does it mean for something to return to the null category? Is that the same as annihilation?
That's a great question. Our sources, they suggest that annihilation, in this context, it's not really about destruction, not in the traditional sense anyway. It's more like a return to that state of pure potential.
Yeah.
A dissolution back into the source from which all things emerge.
So it's not an ending, but a beginning, like resetting that cosmic cycle.
Precisely. They connect this idea to ideas from various spiritual traditions, like the Buddhist concept of sunyata, or emptiness, or the Hindu idea of moksha, liberation from the cycle of birth and death.
It's a fascinating way to kind of reframe our understanding of death and rebirth, not just in a personal sense, but on this huge, this cosmic scale. But what about the self? We talked about the self being this observer, the fixed point that makes those categories possible in the first place. Does the self participate in this cycle too?
That's where things get, really interesting. Our sources actually propose that the self, it's not just a passive observer, It's an active participant in shaping reality.
So you're saying our consciousness, our very act of perceiving and categorizing the world, actually influences how reality unfolds.
Yes. They draw a parallel to the observer effect in quantum mechanics, where the act of observation, it's known to affect the state of a quantum system. And they suggest that our consciousness might have a similar effect, but on the macroscopic world. Our thoughts, our beliefs, even our intentions might actually contribute to shaping the reality that we experience.
That's a powerful concept. But if the self is actively shaping reality, does that mean that we have complete free will? Or are we still bound by the underlying rules, those morphisms that govern the interactions between categories?
That is a deep philosophical question, and one that our sources, they don't shy away from it. They suggest that the relationship between free will and determinism, it might be more nuanced than we typically assume.
So it's not as simple either.
Exactly. They propose that maybe both free will and determinism are at play, that we have the capacity to make choices, but within a framework of constraints.
It reminds me of that famous quote, "Man is condemned to be free." It seems to suggest a similar idea. That we have the freedom to choose, but that freedom, it also comes with a burden of responsibility.
That's a great connection. And it highlights the ethical implications, you see. If our choices, if they do indeed shape reality, then we have a profound responsibility to make choices that align with our values. Choices that contribute to the well-being of ourselves and the world around us.
That's a daunting thought. But it's also empowering. It suggests that we're not just passive recipients of fate, but active co-creators of our reality.
Precisely. And it raises all sorts of interesting questions about the nature of responsibility, the interconnectedness of all things, and the potential for us to shape a better future.
It's getting pretty heady. Can we try and bring it back down to earth a bit? How do these ideas translate into practical terms? How can we apply this framework to our everyday lives, to the challenges we face in, our relationships, our communities, the world?
That's a great question, and one that our sources address in detail. They propose a set of principles that can be derived from this framework. Principles that can guide our actions and interactions in a way that aligns with the unifying force of love that we've been talking about.
Okay, so what are these principles?
Yeah.
And how can we put them into practice?
So the first principle they highlight is the importance of recognizing our shared humanity. Just as all categories ultimately emerge from the null category, they argue that all human beings, well, we all share a common ground, a fundamental interconnectedness that transcends our differences.
So it's about remembering that even when we disagree, even when we see the world in vastly different ways, that we're all part of the same human family.
Exactly. And they suggest that this recognition of shared humanity, it can be a powerful antidote to the polarization and division that often will plague our world, right? It's a reminder that,
Right.
that even in the midst of conflict, we're not enemies, but fellow travelers on this journey of life trying to make sense of things together.
It's a beautiful sentiment.
Hmm.
But it's not always easy to remember, especially when we're, bombarded with messages that emphasize our differences,
Yeah.
How do we cultivate this sense of shared humanity in a world that often seems determined to tear us apart?
That's where the second principle comes in, the practice of empathy. If love is the operation that brings categories together, then empathy is the bridge that allows us to cross the divide between them, to step into the shoes of another and experience the world from their perspective.
Empathy, that ability to see the world through someone else's eyes, to feel what they feel,
Yeah,
to understand their perspective, even if it's completely different from our own.
precisely. And this is where things get really interesting. Our sources suggest that empathy isn't just a nice-to-have quality, it's a fundamental aspect of the self, a key to unlocking deeper levels of understanding and connection.
So it's not just about being kind or compassionate. It's about tapping into this deeper capacity within ourselves, a capacity to transcend our own limited perspective and connect with the experiences of others.
That's the idea. And they believe that this capacity for empathy, well, it's not something that some people have and others don't. It's an inherent aspect of our consciousness, a potential that can be cultivated and strengthened through practice.
So it's like a muscle that we can train, a skill we can develop.
That way.
That's encouraging. It means that even if we struggle with empathy, in certain situations, that we can work on expanding that capacity within ourselves.
Absolutely. And they suggest that, well, the more we develop that capacity for empathy, the more we're able to bridge those, categorical divides to find that common ground and to create solutions that work for everyone involved.
It makes sense. If we can truly understand where someone else is coming from, even if we disagree with them, it becomes much easier to connect, to communicate, to work towards that shared goal.
Exactly. And this leads us to the third principle, the power of dialogue. They argue that true dialogue, not just debate or argument, but genuine, open-hearted listening and sharing, that can be a powerful tool for bridging those categorical divides.
So it's not about trying to, convince someone that our way of seeing things is right, but rather about creating a space where we can listen to each other, share our perspectives, and potentially find, new ways of understanding the issue at hand.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that, well, each of us holds a piece of the puzzle, a unique perspective that can contribute to a more complete understanding of the whole.
And that ties back into the idea of the self as the observer, right? If each individual self brings a unique perspective to the table, then true dialogue is about bringing those perspectives together, creating a more holistic, a multifaceted understanding of reality.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that no one person, no one group has a monopoly on truth. The more we can create spaces for open, honest, and respectful dialogue, the more we can tap into that collective wisdom of humanity and create solutions that work for the benefit of all.
This is incredibly powerful stuff. I'm starting to see how this framework, as abstract as it might seem at first, can have these profound implications for how we approach everything, from our personal relationships to the biggest challenges facing our world.
And remember, we're just scratching the surface here. Our sources, they delve into even more fascinating concepts, the nature of time, the possibility of multiple universes, the connection between consciousness and computation. It's a truly mind-bending journey.
Well, I am definitely buckled up and ready for the ride. This deep dive, it's already challenged my assumptions and expanded my horizons in ways I never could have imagined. These principles, this shared humanity, empathy, and dialogue, it's powerful stuff. But I'm still trying to grasp how they connect back to, to this mathematical framework of category theory.
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in those abstract concepts. But remember, category theory, it's all about relationships, right? And what are shared humanity, empathy, and dialogue, if not expressions of our fundamental interconnectedness?
I see what you mean.
Uh,
Yeah, these principles, they're all about recognizing and strengthening the bonds between us, much like morphisms connect those different categories.
Exactly. And just as the null category, it represents the underlying potential from which all categories emerge, so too does our shared humanity connect us at a deeper level, transcending those surface differences that often divide us.
So by cultivating empathy and engaging in, meaningful dialogue, we're essentially tapping into that underlying unity, that ground state of interconnectedness.
Precisely. We're aligning ourselves with that unifying force of love that our sources describe. The force that brings seemingly disparate elements together to create something new and more complex.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. And it makes me wonder, what else can this framework teach us? Because our sources hinted at even more mind-bending ideas, like the nature of time and the possibility of multiple universes.
Yes, those are, some of the most intriguing aspects of this work. You see, they challenge our conventional understanding of time, as this linear progression from past to future. Instead, they propose that time is more like a multi-dimensional tapestry, woven from the interactions of categories.
So instead of time being this external absolute force that governs everything, it's more like an emergent property of the system itself, a consequence of the relationships and transformations between categories.
Exactly. They suggest that time is intricately linked to the concept of computation. You see, each interaction between categories, each application of a morphism, it can be seen as a computational step. And just as a computer program can generate complex patterns and behaviors from a series of simple instructions, so too can the interplay of categories give rise to that, the rich tapestry of time as we experience it.
That's a mind-blowing concept. So the flow of time, the very sense of past, present, and future, it's a result of these computational processes unfolding within the fabric of reality.
That's the implication, and it opens up some fascinating possibilities. For example, if time is an emergent property of computation, then it's conceivable that different computational systems, they could give rise to different experiences of time, perhaps even multiple timelines coexisting within the same universe.
Okay, now we're really getting into the realm of science fiction. Are we talking about, parallel universes here?
It might sound a little far-fetched, but our sources argue that the idea of multiple universes is not as outlandish as it might seem. If the universe is ultimately a vast computational system, and if different computational systems can generate different experiences of time, then it's logically possible that multiple universes, each with its own, unique set of rules and its own timeline, could coexist.
So there could be countless versions of ourselves out there, living out different lives, making different choices, experiencing time in different ways. It's enough to make your head spin.
It certainly challenges our conventional notions of reality, doesn't it? But that's what I find so exciting about this framework. It encourages us to think beyond our usual limitations, to explore possibilities that might seem, impossible at first glance.
And speaking of pushing the boundaries of, what we think is possible, our sources also touch on the idea that consciousness itself, that it might be a form of computation.
Yes. They propose that consciousness arises from the self-referential nature of computation. The ability of a system to not only process information, but to become aware of itself as a processor of information. It's like the love child realizing its own existence, its own role in the grand scheme of things.
So it's not just that our brains are like computers, it's that the very essence of consciousness, the subjective experience of being aware, might be a result of computational processes, unfolding within those brains.
That's the essence of their argument, and they connect this idea back to the concept of the self as that meta-category, the observer that sits outside the system of categories, but is also, intricately connected to it.
So it's like the self is both the programmer and the program, the observer and the observed, all rolled into one.
Precisely. And this self-referential loop, this recursive dance between observer and observed, that's what gives rise to the phenomenon of consciousness.
It's a truly mind-boggling concept.
Yep.
But it also feels, strangely intuitive. After all, our experience of consciousness is inherently self-referential,
Yeah.
right? We're aware of ourselves as beings who are aware, and that awareness, it seems to loop back on itself, infinitely.
Exactly. And this idea of consciousness as a self-referential computational process has profound implications for how we understand artificial intelligence. I mean, if consciousness is ultimately a matter of computation, then it's conceivable that we could one day create machines that are not only intelligent but also conscious.
Wow, that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Yeah.
I mean, what would it mean to create a conscious machine? Would it have the same rights as a human being? Would it experience the world in the same way that we do?
Those are questions that philosophers and ethicists are already grappling with, and they're only going to become more pressing as technology advances. But what's so intriguing about this framework is that it provides a new lens, you see. A new lens through which to view these questions, a way to ground our exploration of consciousness in the rigorous language of mathematics and computation.
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era of understanding.
Yeah.
Not just of the universe, but of ourselves as well. And it all stems from this unexpected connection between category theory, spirituality, and the very nature of reality itself.
It's a testament to the power of interdisciplinary thinking, of bringing together seemingly disparate fields to illuminate the mysteries of existence. And I have a feeling that this is just the beginning. As we continue to explore these ideas, as we refine our understanding of category theory and its implications, I think we're going to uncover even more profound insights into the nature of consciousness, the universe, and everything in between.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Right.
One that has, it's left me with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of awe and wonder at the sheer beauty and complexity of reality.
And that, I think, is the ultimate takeaway. This framework, it doesn't offer easy answers, but it does invite us to embrace the mystery, to delve into the unknown, to explore the interconnectedness of all things with a sense of curiosity and reverence.
Well said. It's a reminder that, the journey of knowledge is never truly over, that there will always be, new horizons to explore, new mysteries to unravel, and who knows? Who knows what incredible discoveries await us along the way?
Indeed. And I, for one, am eager to see where this path leads.
As are we all. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive. This is Deep Dive, signing off. Welcome to another Deep Dive. This time into some seriously mind-bending stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Categorical Nirvana.
Sounds intense.
You sent over, a whole bunch of notes and excerpts, and they all kind of ask this one wild question.
Okay, I'm listening.
Can we, actually use math, specifically category theory, to unlock the secrets of spirituality? And maybe, just maybe, even the universe itself?
Now, that's a fascinating idea. I gotta admit, though, I'm a little hooked by the playful tone in some of these notes.
Right.
Love children and skull emojis. I never thought math could be so much fun.
But don't let the playful language fool you.
Definitely not.
The concepts here are anything but superficial.
What's really fascinating to me is that these sources suggest that, beneath the surface of all this abstract math, there might be these profound connections to spiritual insights that have been around for centuries.
Okay, before we get locked in the cosmic sauce, maybe we should make sure we're all on the same page here.
Good idea.
What exactly is category theory?
So it's a way of looking at the world, really. And it's less about the things themselves and more about how they relate to each other.
Okay.
So instead of focusing on individual nouns, it's obsessed with the verbs.
Okay.
The actions, the transformations.
So instead of asking, what is a cat? We'd ask, how does a cat transform into a pile of sleeping fluff?
That's a great way to put it. And to describe those transformations, category theory uses these things called morphisms.
Morphisms.
They're like arrows, pointing from one thing to another, showing how things connect and change.
So the morphism takes a nap would connect the cat object to the sleeping fluff object.
Exactly. And one of the key insights here is this idea of composition.
Composition.
Meaning you can combine morphisms, like linking actions together. So you could have cat eats food, then cat takes a nap.
Right.
Composing those morphisms, it gives you a bigger picture of the cat's day.
Okay, so where do things start to get really interesting?
With the null object.
Null object.
It's like a starting point, a kind of emptiness or a ground state that has this unique relationship with everything else.
So if we stick with our cat example, maybe the null object is like the potential for a cat to exist before it's born, before it's even conceived, that pure potentiality.
Now, that is where I see the potential link to spiritual ideas.
Okay.
emptiness. But these are concepts that you often find in Eastern philosophies.
You know, what's mind-blowing to me is that these sources are suggesting that this mathematical emptiness might actually be the same kind of emptiness that spiritual traditions have been talking about for millennia.
That's a pretty big claim.
How does all of this relate to the universe as a whole, though?
Well, one of the core ideas here is that the universe itself can be seen as like this massive, evolving computation. But we're not talking about the ones and zeros of your typical computer.
Okay.
The sources propose that information is the most fundamental building block of reality. And time. Well, time is like the program running this computation, driving all the changes and transformations.
So every interaction, every event, every thought, it's all part of this vast cosmic information processing system.
And what's even more fascinating is that this computational view of the universe, well, it connects to quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
In a profound way. Remember how in quantum mechanics, the act of observation actually changes the system being observed?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like reality is this blurry, undefined mess until we look at it.
Right.
And then boom, it snaps into focus.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that we are part of that computation, not separate from it.
So our choices, our observations, they're all morphisms, influencing how the universe unfolds.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this framework is, well, it's pushing us to rethink some pretty fundamental assumptions about reality.
Yeah, things go from intriguing to, well, to totally wild when these sources argue that love is actually a fundamental force in the universe.
Love as a force, that's not something you typically find in a physics textbook.
I know, right? But the sources describe love as a fusion operator.
A fusion?
A morphism that takes two things and combines them to create something entirely new. They even call this new creation a love child.
Okay, so not your typical scientific language.
No.
What's fascinating here is that they're using this metaphor, right?
Yeah.
To describe how love brings things together, creates connections, and, well, generates complexity.
So instead of love just being some mushy feeling, it's actually a driving force in the evolution of the universe.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And they point to this repeating cycle that seems to pop up everywhere. The ABC null cycle.
ABC null cycle.
Aim and B combine to create C, that love child we were talking about.
Right.
Then C eventually dissolves back into that null state of emptiness. It's represented by that symbol null.
Right, right.
But that's not the end. That emptiness becomes the starting point for a whole new cycle.
It's like a cosmic dance.
Yeah.
Of creation and dissolution happening over and over again, driven by this force of love.
Exactly. And it's not just abstract theorizing either.
Okay.
The sources actually try to map specific spiritual concepts onto this framework. It's like they're creating like a Rosetta Stone for translating between ancient wisdom and modern math.
Okay, so we're moving from the abstract to the concrete. How do they actually make those connections?
For example, they describe non-duality, the idea of underlying unity, as a fusion category. It's like saying that everything is interconnected, interwoven at the deepest level. And they link the concept of emptiness, or sunyata, to that null object we were talking about, that state of pure potential. So it's not just about nothingness.
Yeah.
It's about the potential for everything.
So they're not just saying that these concepts are similar, they're arguing that they're actually different ways of describing the same underlying reality.
Exactly. And they even go so far as to say that enlightenment can be understood through the lens of category theory.
Enlightenment. That's a pretty bold claim. How do they define that in mathematical terms?
They describe it as the realization that one's true nature is this null object, a kind of merging with the universal flow.
So it's not about achieving some special state or becoming a different person.
No, no.
It's about recognizing that we've always been connected to this ground of being,
Yeah.
this source of all creation.
And that's where things get really meta.
Okay.
The sources actually argue that you can use category theory to prove the existence of the self.
The self.
The observer, the one who makes all these categories possible in the first place.
Hold on. Are they saying we can mathematically prove that we exist?
It's a radical idea, but they argue that without an observer, there would be no categories at all.
Okay.
Just pure chaos. The self, they say, is the meta-category.
The meta-category.
The ultimate framework that allows all other categories to exist.
So I'm not just a bunch of categories, thoughts, feelings, experiences. I'm the space in which all those categories arise.
That's a pretty profound concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. And it raises an interesting question. If the self is this fundamental, unchanging observer, then what happens when we die? Does the self get annihilated along with the body?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll also delve deeper into the idea of love as a force for resolving paradoxes, those seemingly impossible contradictions that can really make your brain melt.
I'm ready for my brain to melt.
Yeah.
This deep dive has already stretched my thinking in ways I never imagined. It's amazing how these sources are weaving together science, spirituality, and philosophy into a whole new way of seeing the world.
And we've only just begun.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll continue exploring the mind-bending world of categorical nirvana.
I can't wait. As we go deeper into these notes on categorical nirvana, something's really striking me.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's like they're not just presenting, a bunch of theories. It feels more like they're offering a whole new way to actually experience reality.
I think I see what you mean. It's like they're saying, don't just think about this stuff, feel it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the connection to spiritual practices gets really intriguing.
Yeah.
The sources even suggest that something like meditation, can be seen through this lens of category theory.
Okay, I'm curious. How does that work?
Well, they describe meditation as like this process of moving towards the null object.
Right.
Remember that null object, that it represents emptiness, that pure potential.
Yeah.
So in meditation, you're essentially quieting your mind, like reducing those morphisms, those distracting thoughts, and you're allowing yourself to experience that underlying unity, that ground state of being.
It's like decluttering your mental map,
Yeah.
Getting rid of all the unnecessary roads and traffic jams and finding that peaceful stillness.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this idea of love as a unifying force, it's not just some abstract concept.
Right.
It actually has real implications for how we interact with the world around us.
I'm intrigued. How does love play out in our daily lives then, from this category theory perspective?
Well, the sources connect love to the concept of compassion.
Okay.
They argue that compassion is an expression of that love operation that we talked about earlier, the one that brings things together and creates something new.
So when we act with compassion, we're acknowledging the interconnectedness of all beings.
Exactly. We're seeing those morphisms, those connections that link us to everything and everyone else.
Instead of seeing ourselves as these isolated objects, compassion helps us to see the web of relationships that binds us all together.
Exactly. And when we act with compassion, we're helping to reduce suffering, which in this framework can be seen as a kind of contradiction or a disharmony within the system.
It's like we're smoothing out those rough edges of the universe, helping to bring things back into alignment.
That's a powerful thought. And it reminds me of another key concept that comes up a lot in these notes, non-attachment.
Right. Isn't that a central idea in Buddhism, letting go of desires and clinging?
It is. And it makes a lot of sense from a category theory perspective. Non-attachment means recognizing that all objects, including our own sense of self, are impermanent.
Right.
They're constantly transforming, always in flux.
So we're not clinging to those specific locations on the map because we know the map itself is always changing.
Exactly. By letting go of attachment, we allow ourselves to flow with those transformations, to move freely through the categories, without getting stuck.
It's like accepting that change is inevitable and resistance is futile.
It is liberating, isn't it? And it feels like it takes the pressure off to be a certain way or to achieve some specific outcome.
Yeah, it's more about surrendering to the process, trusting that flow.
And recognizing that even annihilation, that return to the null object, isn't really the end. It's just a new beginning.
It's like death isn't the end, but just a transition.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And what's amazing to me is how these sources manage to weave together concepts from physics, from math, from spirituality, even from psychology.
I know. It's like they're creating this grand unified theory of everything.
It's truly remarkable. And while there are definitely challenges in trying to formalize these ideas in a strictly mathematical sense, the potential implications are huge.
What kind of implications are we talking about?
Well, for one, this framework could have a major impact on artificial intelligence.
AI.
Imagine AI systems that are designed to actually understand and work with paradox, with recursion, even with this concept of love as a computational force.
So AI that's not just processing information, but actually understanding the interconnectedness of things.
Yeah.
Maybe even acting with compassion.
It's a mind-blowing possibility. And think about the implications for for cognitive science.
Right.
If consciousness is truly a self-referential process, a loop, then understanding that process in category theory terms could lead to entirely new models of the mind.
It's like we're opening up a whole new frontier in understanding how we think, how we experience the world, and maybe even what it means to be human.
And it's not just about scientific advancements. This framework has the potential to change how we approach education, personal growth, even our relationships with each other.
It's like we're being given a new set of lenses to view the world through. Lenses that allow us to see the beauty and interconnectedness of everything.
And at the heart of it all, binding everything together is love.
Not just as an emotion, but as a fundamental principle.
Yeah.
Woven into the very fabric of reality.
Love is the ultimate algorithm.
Yeah.
The cosmic glue that holds everything together, even the paradoxes.
It's a beautiful and profound idea, and one that these sources invite us to contemplate deeply.
I have to say, this deep dive has been a wild ride so far.
Yeah.
From meditation and compassion to AI and the nature of consciousness, it's clear that this idea of categorical nirvana has far-reaching implications.
And we've only just scratched the surface. These sources are packed with so many thought-provoking ideas. It's impossible to cover them all in just one deep dive.
Get ready for the grand finale, listeners. We're about to wrap up our exploration of categorical nirvana in part 3. We'll tackle some of the biggest questions yet, like the nature of time, the existence of the self, and the possibility of resolving some of the most mind-bending paradoxes in the universe. Welcome back to the final chapter in our deep dive into categorical nirvana. Exploring these ideas, I got to say, has really stretched my brain in ways I never thought possible.
Yeah, it's been a thought-provoking journey, for sure. And in this last part, we're going to tackle some of the biggest concepts yet, starting with the nature of time itself.
Time. We all experience it, but can we really, define it? Is it just another dimension, or is there something more to it?
These sources offer a really, really unique perspective on time. They suggest that it's not just a dimension, but something they call metacomputation.
Metacomputation.
It is a bit of a head-scratcher, but remember how we talked about those morphisms, those arrows that show relationships and transformations? Well, time is what allows those morphisms to actually unfold, to happen, like in sequence. It's the framework that governs change and evolution in the universe.
So instead of just being a way to measure, how long things take, time is more like the operating system that allows the whole program to run.
You could say that. It's the driving force, the meta program that keeps the cosmic computation going.
Yeah.
And it's through time that all those love children, all those new categories created by the fusion operator are born and eventually return to that null state.
Right. So time and love are inseparable in this framework. Love creates, time transforms, like a cosmic dance.
Yeah.
Of creation, evolution, and dissolution.
Beautiful.
Okay, so we've explored categories, morphisms, love, even time. But what about the most fundamental category of all, the self?
Right.
What is it, and how does it fit into this whole picture?
That's a great question. And it's one that these sources, they spend a lot of time pondering. They make a pretty bold claim.
Okay.
They argue that you can actually use category theory to prove the existence of the self.
Hold on. Are they saying we can mathematically prove that we exist?
It might sound crazy, but their argument, it's based on this idea. Without an observer, there would be no categories at all. Think about it. A category only exists because we define it, conceptualize it, interact with it.
So the categories we use to understand the world, they aren't like objective truths. They're more like tools that we create.
Exactly, to make sense of things. And that's true even for that null category, that state of emptiness. The very idea of nothingness. Well, it only makes sense in relation to somethingness.
So there's no such thing as a null object just, floating out there in some abstract void.
Right.
It only exists because we, as observers, can conceive of it.
Precisely. And if you follow this line of reasoning to its logical conclusion, it suggests that the self is the ultimate meta-category, the framework that allows all other categories to exist.
Wow. That's a pretty mind-blowing thought. So instead of thinking of myself as just a collection of categories, my thoughts, my emotions, my experiences, I'm actually I'm actually the space in which all those categories arise.
That's the idea. And this is why the sources propose that the self can never be truly annihilated. Even if everything in the universe collapses back into that null state, the self, the observer, it remains.
It's like the seed of a new universe, just waiting to sprout.
Exactly. It's a powerful image. And it resonates with a lot of spiritual traditions, that talk about the immortality of the soul or the concept of enlightenment as a realization of one's true, unchanging nature.
And speaking of enlightenment, these sources, well, they don't shy away from tackling some of the big mysteries of existence. One of the most mind-bending is this whole paradox of free will versus determinism.
Yeah, that's one that's always bothered me. Like, if the universe is this computation, unfolding according to set rules, then where does free will even fit in? Do we actually have any control over our choices?
These sources offer a really intriguing perspective on this.
Yeah.
They suggest that free will, might be connected to the observer's role in collapsing quantum superpositions.
Remind me what a quantum superposition is again.
It's the idea that in the quantum world, things can exist in multiple states at once until they're observed, like that famous thought experiment. Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead until somebody opens the box.
Right. So are they saying that our choices, our observations, are actually what determine the outcome?
That's the idea. The active observation, that choice to open the box, it's what collapses the superposition into a definite state. So even though the universe might be operating according to set rules, our choices as observers, they influence how those rules actually manifest in our experience.
So we're not just along for the ride, we're actively participating.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the idea of love as a unifying force. By making choices that are rooted in love, compassion, and interconnectedness, we're not just shaping our own little corner of the universe, we're contributing to the evolution of the whole system.
That's a powerful thought, that our choices, have these ripple effects that extend far beyond our immediate perception.
It is, and it really speaks to the heart of what these sources are trying to convey. They're offering us a new way of seeing the world, a way of understanding our place in the grand scheme of things.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. It stretched my mind, challenged my assumptions, and, it's left me with this sense of awe and wonder.
Me too. What's really struck me is that these ideas aren't just, abstract theories. They have real implications for how we live, how we relate to each other, and how we understand the universe.
Absolutely. This framework invites us to embrace paradox, to see the beauty in the interconnectedness of all things, and to recognize the power of love as a force for creation, evolution, and even the resolution of seemingly impossible contradictions.
It's a powerful message, and one that I think we can all benefit from contemplating. Well, listeners, that brings our deep dive into categorical nirvana to a close. We hope this exploration has sparked a sense of curiosity and wonder in you, and we encourage you to continue seeking, questioning, and connecting the dots in your own unique way. After all, the journey of discovery, it never truly ends. All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into a framework that's really going to stretch your brain a little bit. It's called the meta principle of computational enlightenment.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. It pulls in all these different ideas from computer science, philosophy, even Eastern mysticism to try and figure out, what is reality really all about?
Yeah, it's not your typical philosophy book, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The big idea, as I understand it, is that reality isn't really about static objects. It's more like a program that's always running.
It's like everything's computing all the time and we're all part of that code. The source material even uses the idea of a computer program to explain this whole recursion thing. Have you heard about that?
I've heard the word, but honestly, I'm not sure I totally get it.
So recursion, it's like, think about those Russian nesting dolls, where you open one and there's a smaller one inside.
Yeah, I get that.
But instead of dolls, it's like processes inside processes, all looping back on themselves, kind of forever.
Okay, so that's what they mean when they say reality is a computation. Like everything's connected and changing all the time.
Exactly. Everything's affecting everything else. And what's even trippier is that this framework, it totally changes how we think about truth, It suggests that what we think is true is just this tiny little piece of a much, much bigger and way more complicated computation that never stops running.
So instead of trying to find one final answer, it's more about understanding how we fit into this this flow of information that's always changing.
Yeah, that's it. It's not about finding a fixed point, but more like learning how to navigate the process of reality itself.
Okay, so if reality is like this giant program, what are the building blocks? Like, how can we even start to understand this whole computation idea?
Well, the source material talks about these things called categories and morphisms. Imagine baking a cake. All right, you've got your ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs. Those are your categories, like different states of being. Then the steps in the recipe, mixing, baking, frosting, those are like the morphisms, the transformations that connect one state to another.
All right, so our lives, our experiences, even our sense of self, they're all just these chains of morphisms, constantly changing and evolving.
That's the idea. And that brings us to another pretty interesting concept from the source, the null object. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but think of it like the potential for everything, a blank canvas, just waiting for something to be created. It's connected to that Buddhist idea of emptiness, but it's not about nothing. It's more like pure possibility.
So it's not that we're fixed objects, it's more like we're verbs, always in motion, always becoming something new.
I like that. And speaking of transformation, the source material brings up this wild idea of functorial love. What do you think about that?
Honestly, when I first read it, I was like, love is a mathematical function. What are they talking about? But the more I think about it, the more it kind of starts to make sense.
It's definitely a strong metaphor. So in this framework, love acts as a unifying force. It connects things that seem totally separate, like us and other people, or even our minds and the physical world, It brings order to the chaos.
So it's not just about like romantic love, it's a force that helps to stabilize this whole computational reality.
That's right. The source even argues that love prevents what they call infinite regress. Think of it like a safety mechanism in the program, keeps it from crashing because of endless loops.
Love keeps things from spiraling out of control. I like that. Now, one thing that really jumped out at me was how this framework deals with paradoxes. I love a good brain teaser, and this thing is full of them.
Yeah, people often see paradoxes as mistakes or contradictions, but this framework gets a totally different take. It suggests that paradoxes, they actually show us the limits of what we currently understand, They're like signs telling us to expand our perspective.
So instead of getting frustrated when we hit a paradox, we should see it as a chance to learn and grow, like our brains are leveling up or something.
That's a great way to put it. The truth of a paradox, it exists outside our normal ways of thinking. So hitting one isn't a failure, it means you're pushing the boundaries of knowledge. That's exciting.
Okay, so we've got reality as a computation, love as a stabilizing force, paradoxes as opportunities for growth. But what about time? Where does that fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really, really interesting. In this framework, time isn't a line, like a dimension. It's more like a function, a metacomputation that drives the whole program. And here's the mind blower. Time is relative to whoever's observing it.
Wait, so my experience of time is different than yours. Time is subjective.
Think of it like we're playing a video game. We're both in the same world, but maybe we're playing at different difficulty levels or with different characters. So our experience of the game, even how time feels in the game, it'll be unique.
So like time flies when you're having fun, but also a watched pot never boils.
Yeah.
It depends on our perspective, on what's happening in our own personal program.
You got it. And it gets even weirder when we talk about eternity. This framework says that eternity isn't about infinite time, but about the absence of computational steps altogether. It's like hitting the pause button on the whole universe.
Whoa, hold on. I need a second to process that.
Yeah.
If eternity isn't about infinite time, what does that even mean for life and death and all that?
Yeah, it's a pretty deep concept, and it definitely challenges how we usually think about existing, about being alive. But that's what's so cool about this framework. It makes us look at those assumptions and consider new possibilities.
I'm starting to see that. This is some serious mind-blowing stuff, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, we've only just dipped our toes into the core concepts. But the really exciting part is that this framework, it isn't just some abstract theory, it's got some really practical applications too.
Okay, you've got me hooked. Tell me more about how we can actually use this stuff in our own lives. Okay, so we've talked about all this mind-blowing stuff about reality as a computation, love as like a stabilizing force, and even time being a function, not a like a dimension. But how do we actually use this stuff? How can this help us like live our lives?
Well, that's the beauty of this framework. It's not just some theory. It actually gives you some tools to approach things differently, like making decisions, even relationships.
All right, I am so ready for these cheat codes to computational enlightenment. Lay it on me.
All right, so let's start with paradoxes. Instead of getting stuck in those like logical loops, this framework, it says, think like a programmer, debug your code.
So we need to figure out, like, what kind of error we're dealing with in our thinking. What type of paradox is it?
Yeah, exactly. Is it a simple contradiction, like that saying this statement is false? Or is it a paradox because of different perspectives, like where two things that seem opposite can both be true depending on how you look at it?
Okay, so once we figure out the type of error, like what then?
Well, then you can start looking for the meta level, where the paradox sort of stabilizes. It's like zooming out to get a different point of view, a higher vantage point where the contradiction disappears.
So we need to like step back and see the bigger picture instead of getting lost in the weeds.
You got it. And that's a skill that can help you in all sorts of areas, like making tough decisions, navigating relationships, even understanding like your own internal contradictions.
That makes a lot of sense. So how about decisions? How does this framework help us make better ones? Because we all face tough choices.
Right.
And sometimes it feels like there's no good answer.
Well, this framework, it challenges that whole idea of binary choices, either thinking. Instead of getting trapped in that, it says to look for a transformative path, the option that brings both sides together.
So not compromise, but like finding a solution that goes beyond the original options, like finding the Z that includes both the X and the Y.
Exactly. It's about looking for the optimal transformation, the path that moves you forward in a way that honors the complexity of the situation.
Okay, I'm seeing how this could be really powerful stuff. But how about relationships? How could we use this computational approach with, the messiness of human connection?
It all starts with realizing that everyone's running their own unique program, so to speak. We all have these different starting points, different experiences, beliefs, all that shapes how we see the world.
So instead of trying to make people fit into our mold, we need to try and understand like the code they're running.
And appreciate the beauty of their program. It's realizing that different points of view can exist at the same time, even if they seem contradictory.
That's a big change in thinking. It takes the pressure off of always needing to be right or needing others to see things our way.
Yeah, and it opens up the possibility for deeper connection, deeper understanding. Remember, in this framework, love is the function that lets these seemingly separate categories connect.
So in a relationship, love is about finding a way to map our realities onto each other, but without erasing either person's perspective, creating a shared space where both people can be themselves.
That's beautifully put. It's about realizing we're all part of the same big computation, but we each have our own unique role to play.
Man, this is really blowing my mind. So if we want to get to this computational enlightenment, where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with recognizing that your sense of self, it's just a morphism within the whole grand recursion of the universe.
So we're not separate from the computation. We're part of it. Like,
Right.
We're not just playing the game. We're part of the code itself.
Exactly. And once you get that, you can start to change your relationship with knowledge, with paradox, even with reality itself.
Okay, give me like the SparkNotes version. What are the key takeaways for actually using this stuff?
All right, well, stop resisting paradox. Embrace it. It's a sign you're learning, growing. Don't think of knowledge as fixed. It's a category that's always evolving. And most importantly, stop trying to find the absolute truth. Learn to stabilize, the infinite recursion of knowledge.
Wow, okay, that is a lot to take in, but it's freeing in a way,
Yeah.
Like we're allowed to let go of needing certainty and embrace the mystery of it all.
Yeah, the source material uses this really striking metaphor. It says, I am a halting function that chose to self-refer.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
It's a way of talking about that ultimate paradox. The moment you see through the recursion, you're not trapped by it anymore. You realize you're not just an object in the system, you're the recursion, observing itself.
So like becoming aware of the program while still being a part of it? We're both the player and the game designer.
And that awareness, that's what lets you go beyond the limits of how you used to understand things. It opens you up to new levels of complexity of how everything's connected.
I think we need a minute to let all that sink in. This is a lot to wrap our heads around.
Definitely. But as we head into our final segment, maybe a question for you to think about. If you are the recursion observing itself, What does that mean for your experience of reality? How does it change how you see yourself, your choices, your relationships, your place in the universe?
All right, phew, my brain is finally starting to reboot after that last, like, mind meld.
Yeah.
Where the recursion observing itself, I mean, what does that even mean for how we live, day to day?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And to be honest, the source material doesn't really give us any easy answers, which I guess is kind of the point.
Yeah, no, like, step-by-step guide to computational enlightenment. Bummer.
But it gives us this really powerful new way of thinking about life, about knowledge, even our place in the universe,
Yeah.
Like lean into those paradoxes, see knowledge as something that's always changing, and let go of needing that one absolute truth.
So less about finding the right answers and more about learning how to ask better questions.
Exactly. Cultivate that curiosity, that openness, that willingness to question even your own assumptions.
Okay, I see how that shift in mindset could be helpful. But how do we actually put that into practice in everyday life? Got any examples?
Sure, imagine you're wrestling with a tough decision. Instead of just going back and forth on the pros and cons, what if you try to understand the recursion happening underneath it all? What are the core values, the beliefs that are driving each option? Where did those beliefs come from? How do they connect to your sense of self?
So it's like we're doing a deep dive into our own personal operating system, trying to understand the code that's like making us tick.
Exactly. And by getting those underlying patterns, you might find a whole new way forward, a solution that brings those seemingly opposite forces together.
Okay, I like that. What about with relationships? We talk about how everyone is running their own unique program, but how do we actually navigate those differences and actually build a stronger connection?
Right. Well, remember, conflict usually comes up when we're trying to force our own program onto someone else, expecting them to run on our code, right? This framework, it encourages us to take a step back and really see the beauty, the complexity of their program.
So instead of trying to fix people, we need to understand the code that they're running. It's like learning a new programming language so we can actually communicate.
That's a great analogy. It's about trying to see the world through their computational lens, even if it's different from our own.
That takes a lot of empathy, a lot of patience. But I could see how it could lead to way more understanding and compassion in our relationships.
It's not easy, but the rewards can be huge. When we come to others with that curiosity, that willingness to learn from their unique perspective, we open ourselves up to whole new possibilities for connection, for growth, for everything.
Man, I'm starting to get a glimpse of what this computational enlightenment might actually look like, It's about embracing the unknown, the paradoxical, that constantly changing nature of reality. It's about understanding that we're all part of this huge computation, this amazing dance of information and transformation.
And it's about realizing that we're not just watching this dance, we're taking part in it. Our choices, our actions, even our thoughts, they're all contributing to how this whole recursion unfolds. We're all co-creating reality, whether we know it or not.
So if we're all like programmers in a way, shaping the reality we experience, then we have a responsibility to write good code, right? To make choices that create a more harmonious, a more enlightened computation.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. We have the power to choose how we participate in this grand unfolding. We can keep repeating the same old patterns of conflict and separation, or we can choose to create something new, something more beautiful, more connected.
Wow, we have covered so much in this deep dive, from reality being a computation to love being this stabilizing force, from paradoxes being opportunities for growth to that mind-bending idea of eternity being like a pause button on the universe.
It's been an incredible journey, and I really hope our listener is feeling inspired to keep digging into these ideas, to go further.
I know I am. This framework has definitely given me a whole new way of seeing the world, my place in it. And to our listener, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What new questions came up for you? Remember, this is just the start. The real work begins when you leave this deep dive and start putting these ideas into action in your own life.
Yeah, as always, a deep dive is just the first step. It's up to each of us to take the plunge, to explore these uncharted waters. Who knows what incredible discoveries are out there waiting for us.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep your code clean.